Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your chosen sources and extract the most impactful insights, giving you a shortcut to being well informed. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating book. It's called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. It's by economist Sendhil Mullainathan from Harvard and psychologist Eldar Shafir from Princeton. And this deep dive, it's all about understanding a concept they call the scarcity mindset. Now, you might think poverty is, well, just about not having enough money, right? But what these authors found, the research here, it reveals a much deeper kind of psychological trap. They observed this really common phenomenon. The poor seem to get poorer, and the rich, well, they get richer. And sure, we often blame external things like investment capital or access to education, platforms, opportunities. Mullainathan and Shafir, they propose something different, something maybe even a bit counterintuitive.
What's really interesting, I think, is their argument that even if someone who's been trapped in long-term poverty gets a windfall, like a sum of money, the way they actually use it often leads them right back to where they started, back to bankruptcy, back to poverty, which really suggests there's some kind of internal factor, at play. And importantly, when they talk about poverty, it's not just about money. They broaden that definition quite a bit. It really extends to any state where you feel like you don't have enough of something, a perceived deficiency. So it could be a lack of time, maybe knowledge, skills, or even good relationships.
That's a really key point. It's the perception of lacking something. So it's not just objective reality, but that internal feeling, like someone with a jam-packed schedule who feels like they never have enough time. Is that the idea?
Exactly that kind of thing. That feeling of constant pressure of not having enough buffer.
Okay, so what does this scarcity mindset actually mean for us? Like cognitively, what are the dangers? And I guess the big question is, how can we stop it from trapping us? That's really our mission today, right? To unpack what scarcity is, its negative impacts, and maybe find some practical ways to break free. Okay, let's get into it. So first off, let's nail down what scarcity means in this context. You said it's not just objective lack, it's more a state of mind.
Precisely. It's very much a state of mind. Think about that really urgent feeling you get when a big deadline is coming up fast. The book gives this example. Say it's Thursday, and you have a major weekly task due Friday. Suddenly, you're completely laser-focused on that one thing, aren't you? You push everything else aside because finishing that task is the absolute top priority. That intense, highly concentrated state. That's what they mean by the scarcity state. And, this state can actually give you what they call a focus dividend. It's like a short-term burst of really high concentration and productivity, like pulling an all-nighter to finish a project, or how the last few chocolates in the box somehow taste the best, or how we really savor those last couple of days of a vacation. In the short term, that focus helps us make the absolute most of whatever resources we have left.
That focus dividend, it sounds great in theory, like a temporary superpower. But here's where it gets tricky, right? The authors argue that while it's useful in short bursts, like a sprint, being stuck in that scarcity mindset for a long time, that's not good at all.
Not at all. In fact, they argue it actively drags you down. It can pull you into this really vicious cycle of long-term poverty, long-term deprivation in whatever resource you feel you lack.
Okay, so how does that happen? How does the short-term focus turn into a long-term trap? The book talks about consequences, right? 4 of them.
That's right. Scarcity tends to produce 4 major effects, and together they create this trap. The first one is what they call tunnel vision. Imagine like looking through a narrow pipe or a tube. You could only see what's directly in front of you. Everything outside that narrow view, it's just gone. You miss it completely. So when we're facing scarcity, our attention narrows like that. We prioritize the most immediate, the most urgent task. But often, that's at the expense of genuinely important things, things that could actually help us escape the scarcity in the long run.
Wow. The book gives a really striking example of this with American firefighters, doesn't it? These are highly trained professionals, yet the statistics show something like 20–25% of their accidental deaths happen on the way to the fire, not actually fighting the fire.
Yeah, it's shocking.
And the number one cause, unbelievably, is not wearing seatbelts. It accounts for almost 80% of those specific accidents. How is that even possible for people trained to save lives?
It's a perfect example of tunnel vision in action. When that alarm goes off, firefighters instantly enter a state of extreme time scarcity. They've got maybe 60 seconds to get dressed, get on the truck, get moving. And at the same time, their minds are racing, strategizing for the fire itself. They're planning routes, thinking about the building structure, how much water they'll need, how big the fire might be.
Right, immense pressure.
Exactly. All these urgent, critical mental tasks just consume their available bandwidth. And something crucial but routine, like buckling a seatbelt, it gets pushed completely out of their immediate focus. It falls into the tunnel's blind spot.
80% just from not wearing seatbelts.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So it's not about being careless, it's the cognitive load forcing that narrow focus.
Precisely.
And this isn't just for life or death emergencies, is it? I can see this playing out in everyday life too. Like, you might normally go for a run in the morning for your health, but if you have a huge project due, suddenly that long-term investment in your health just seems less important than finishing the work right now.
No.
You know it's important for the future, but the scarcity of time makes you sacrifice that future value for the immediate deadline pressure.
Exactly. And there's a psychological reason for this, too, linked to something called inhibition. It's interesting. If I ask you, besides milk, what else is white? You might actually struggle to name, say, 10 things quickly.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
But if I just ask what things are white, your mind goes everywhere, right? Moonlight, paper, clouds, snow, ivory, tons of
Just much easier.
that besides milk constraint. It inhibits your broader thinking. It narrows your focus. In the same way, the intense focus demanded by scarcity, that urgency, it inhibits other competing thoughts, even important ones. It keeps you locked in the tunnel. Okay, so the second effect of scarcity is what the authors call borrowing. This isn't just literal borrowing like money. It's this habit of consistently overdrawing on future resources to deal with the present. Think about credit cards. It's a classic example. Once you start relying on them, it's easy to get stuck in a constant state of financial scarcity. You're always using this month's income to pay off last month's debt. And then an unexpected expense pops up, maybe a wedding gift you need to buy, or your car breaks down.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're pushed into high-interest debt, maybe even default.
It is surprising, like you said earlier, that the book points out poorer individuals are often more likely to take out these really high-interest loans that often lead straight to bankruptcy. It's not that they don't understand the interest rates are terrible. They know.
They absolutely know.
But that immediate pressing need for cash just overrides the future consequences in that moment of scarcity. They borrow, hoping something somehow will change down the line.
And it's definitely not just money. People do this with time all the time. Think about busy people who constantly push this week's unfinished tasks onto next week's plate.
Guilty as charged sometimes.
We all do it. But if it becomes a habit, it keeps you in this chronic state of time scarcity. You're always behind, always playing catch-up. And it means you ignore the crucial long-term solutions, right? Like developing better time management habits or managing your energy better or finding ways to work more efficiently overall. Over time, this constant borrowing just digs the hole deeper. It increases the total scarcity you experience.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have tunnel vision, then borrowing. What's the third consequence?
The third one is a lack of slack.
Lack of slack, like no wiggle room.
Exactly. No buffer, no extra time, no extra space, no spare resources. Think about packing a suitcase for a trip.
No.
If you've got a big suitcase, plenty of room. You just throw things in, right? Maybe add some extras just in case. Just take much mental effort.
Easy.
But if you have a small suitcase, one that's already pretty full, now packing becomes this intense cognitive exercise. You're constantly weighing options, comparing items, taking things out, trying to repack, squeezing just one more thing in.
Oh, yeah. That's stressful. Takes forever.
Takes enormous mental energy and time. And the authors point out, this is a big reason why people experiencing poverty often feel so incredibly exhausted. It's the sheer mental burden of that constant calculation. Constantly weighing and comparing every decision, every dollar spent, every minute used. This hyper-efficiency you're forced into in the moment, trying to make every resource stretch. It actually drains your attention and your energy, which then reinforces the tunnel vision we talked about and makes it even harder to step back and focus on the bigger picture.
So having slack, that unused time or extra money or just mental breathing room, it becomes incredibly important, doesn't it?
Hugely important.
The book tells this amazing story about a hospital. They had 32 operating rooms, always booked solid, doing over 30,000 surgeries a year. But any emergency surgery would just throw the entire schedule into chaos. Doctors were constantly playing catch-up, working crazy overtime, getting burnt out, and crucially, making more mistakes.
Right.
And the hospital was paying huge costs because of these errors and all the overtime pay.
And then this consultant comes in with a solution that sounded, well, completely nuts at first. The consultant said, you have 32 operating rooms. Okay, reserve one, keep it empty just for emergencies.
I can just imagine the reaction.
Oh, the hospital leadership was furious. They saw it as a total waste of a precious expensive resource in an empty, idle operating room.
Yeah, we're already overbooked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they were persuaded to try it.
Yeah.
And the results were immediate and dramatic. They saw a 5% increase in the overall number of surgeries they could handle, the reception rate. Nearly half the number of surgeries were happening after 3 p.m., meaning less late finishes, less overtime, and a significant drop in error rates. The positive effect was almost instantaneous.
That is such a brilliant illustration. But yeah, I can totally see the initial resistance. It looks like wasted resources on the surface. But the consultant obviously saw the hidden costs, right? The cost of the constant disruption.
Exactly.
The overtime, the payouts for medical mistakes, the lower efficiency from exhausted doctors. All of that was far more expensive than the cost of keeping one OR seemingly idle.
Precisely. By building in that slack, that buffer, the hospital could suddenly absorb unexpected emergencies without derailing the entire system. And the authors really emphasize this point. It's a fundamental principle. Systems with zero slack are incredibly fragile. Like people caught in debt cycles, they have zero financial slack. So any tiny unexpected expense, a small emergency, throws them immediately into a full-blown scarcity crisis. You see slack built into so many efficient systems, things we don't even think about, like the little bit of blank space at the end of an old cassette tape, or why you don't fill your washing machine absolutely to the brim.
Right, it needs room to tumble.
Or even traffic flow. Roads function fine up to a certain capacity, maybe 85%, but push it beyond that. Eliminate the slack. Instant gridlock. Slack isn't waste. It's actually the guarantee of efficient, resilient operation.
So scarcity fundamentally is the absence of slack.
That's a great way to put it.
And while creating slack might make you seem less maxed out or less efficient in the very immediate moment, the positive returns, less mental burden, more flexibility, better decisions, maybe even more happiness, they're immense. It reminds me of that Thoreau quote, something like, "A man's richness is proportional to the number of things he can afford to let alone, having the slack to not worry about everything."
That's beautiful and very relevant here. Okay, that brings us to the fourth consequence, which is arguably the most critical one. It's bandwidth scarcity.
Bandwidth scarcity. Okay, what do they mean by bandwidth here? Like internet speed?
Sort of, but for our brains. Bandwidth is our total cognitive capacity. It includes our ability to calculate, to pay attention, to make sound decisions, to follow through on plans, and, importantly, to resist temptation. The authors use the analogy of a highway. Our mental highway has a limited number of lanes, maybe about 7 things we can actively juggle or keep top of mind at once.
7. That number comes up a lot in psychology, doesn't it?
It does. Miller's Law, the magical number 7, plus or minus 2. When you try to push more traffic onto that highway than it can handle, you get bandwidth burden. Things slow down, you get congestion, processing speed drops, you might even have mental accidents, bad decisions, forgotten tasks.
That makes intuitive sense. You know, if you look at your phone's home screen, you probably don't have more than, 7 or 8 frequently used apps right there.
Probably not.
Or your circle of truly close friends and family you interact with regularly. Probably around that number, too. It does feel like a cognitive limit for easy management. Try to juggle more and you just feel drained, overwhelmed, even though technically your brain is only processing one thing at a time.
Right, and scarcity, the authors argue, shrinks this highway even further. It forces us into that hyper-focused state we discussed, but it consumes so much bandwidth just maintaining that focus on the immediate lack. And this lack of bandwidth, they argue, is a major reason why people stay stuck in poverty or any scarcity trap. Just the daily struggle, the constant calculations, the worry it consumed almost all their mental bandwidth. There's just no cognitive energy left over for the important long-term issues. They're constantly preoccupied with, stretching pennies, making rent, meeting the next deadline. Their minds are just full, utterly full. There's literally no room left to think strategically about how to escape their situation.
The book gives some really powerful, almost heartbreaking examples of this. Like, there are 285 million people worldwide with diabetes. It's treatable. Yet, tragically, many die every year simply because they don't consistently take their medication on time. And the financially poor are hugely overrepresented in that group.
Yeah.
Or another one, farmers in really poverty-stricken areas often don't weed their fields, even though they know weeding significantly boosts the crop yield.
Right, they know it works.
It's not laziness. They're incredibly busy planting, watering, fertilizing, doing all the urgent stuff.
But their bandwidth is so consumed by just surviving day to day that the non-urgent but highly beneficial task of weeding Just doesn't happen. It falls off the mental radar.
Exactly. And this lack of bandwidth explains so many other behaviors often observed among the poor, particularly in developed countries like the US. Things like higher rates of obesity, maybe investing less time or resources in child education,
Yeah.
not buying insurance even when it's subsidized.
Skipping vaccinations. Skipping vaccinations, yeah. Not saving money, not investing for the future. If you ask people directly, they'll tell you they know these things are important. They value them. But in the context of their daily struggle, these things just aren't urgent. They don't command the scarce bandwidth available.
And it goes even deeper than just neglecting tasks.
Yeah.
This bandwidth depletion actually lowers your fundamental cognitive abilities, doesn't it?
It does. It's quite stunning.
There was that experiment mentioned in the book where they tested people's cognitive performance.
Mhm.
And the group that was first asked to think about their financial problems, just think about them, they scored significantly worse on subsequent intelligence tests, almost half as well, I think, compared to the group that wasn't primed with money worries.
That's right. Just the mental act of contemplating their scarcity temporarily reduced their effective IQ. Their available bandwidth was choked. And our bandwidth underpins almost everything, right? Judging facial expressions accurately, controlling impulses, reading comprehension, critical thinking. A chronic lack of it can lead to this state the authors call a floating dullness.
Floating dullness.
Yeah, you know that feeling when someone's talking to you, but you can tell their mind is elsewhere. Maybe they're distracted by their phone or just preoccupied.
They seem detached, maybe even a bit rude sometimes.
Exactly. The authors observed this kind of distractedness, this dullness, in many conversations with people experiencing deep poverty. And it connects to other things. They often sleep poorly, which further reduces bandwidth. They tend to have less self-control. And they might resort to coping mechanisms like smoking or drinking when stressed, which, of course, only exacerbates their problems in the long run.
So when people don't take their meds, or don't read the fields, or don't buy insurance, or save, or invest, it's not that they don't value these things. It's not a character flaw or lack of intelligence.
Not at all.
It's because they lack the mental bandwidth, the cognitive resources, to prioritize and act on them amidst the constant pressure of immediate needs.
Precisely. What they truly lack isn't just the money or the time itself. It's the capacity, the bandwidth to engage in long-term planning, to learn new skills, to manage finances effectively, to do the things that could actually break the cycle. And this, right here, clearly illustrates the scarcity trap. It's a feedback loop. For someone who's financially poor, the lack of money forces an intense focus on money. This consumes their bandwidth, which leads to more impulsivity, maybe poor decisions like taking out bad loans, borrowing, which leads to more debt, reinforcing the lack of money. It's an endless cycle. And it's the same for the time poor. Too many things demanding attention leads to bandwidth scarcity. This creates constant feelings of urgency, leading to rushed decisions, maybe pushing tasks off, borrowing time, which ultimately results in even less time available down the road. It's just a vicious circle, whichever resource is scarce.
Wow. It really boils down to this central idea, doesn't it? That obsessing over the thing you lack can actually paradoxically stop you from getting it.
That's a powerful way to put it.
You want more money. Maybe the answer isn't just focusing on money, but focusing on how to create value or serve needs.
Right. Shift the focus.
Because the scarcity mindset itself, it acts almost like a strong emotion, triggering all these negative cycles we've just discussed. So knowing all this, understanding the trap, how do we avoid falling into it? Or how do we climb out if we're already stuck? The authors offer some concrete strategies, right? 3 main ones.
They do. 3 key strategies to try and break the cycle. The first one is save bandwidth.
Save bandwidth. Okay, how do we do that?
The core idea is pretty simple. Consciously try to reduce the number of trivial, unimportant decisions you have to make every single day. Think about Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs back in the day wearing the same outfit every day.
Removes one decision.
Exactly. It's one less thing to spend mental energy on. The less time and effort you waste weighing minor decisions, the more mental energy, more bandwidth you free up for what truly matters.
So practically that means stop sweating the small stuff. Don't nickel and dime yourself over tiny amounts of money, maybe. Or don't spend hours researching to save just a few bucks on something insignificant.
Exactly. Stop dwelling constantly on what you feel you lack.
Instead, make a conscious choice to redirect that focus, that precious bandwidth, onto activities that are genuinely valuable, things that build momentum over the long term.
That's a critical first step. Be intentional about where your bandwidth goes. Okay. The second strategy is to create slack.
Create slack. Build in that buffer we talked about earlier.
Yes. Even if you feel you have very little money, the advice is to intentionally set aside even a tiny portion, put it into savings, or maybe invest it in learning a new skill that could pay off later. And definitely try to avoid overdrawing or borrowing, especially those crippling high-interest loans, unless it's an absolute unavoidable emergency.
And what about slack in terms of time?
Same principle.
Yeah.
Don't overdraft your future time.
Try to finish today's work today as much as possible. Always keep in mind that tomorrow will bring its own demands.
And critically, as you mentioned, don't overschedule yourself down to the last minute.
Build in some downtime.
Absolutely. Regular rest, periods of doing nothing, just letting your mind wander. That isn't a luxury. It's essential for sustained performance and clear thinking. It might feel like wasted time in the moment, but it actually expands your bandwidth. It makes you more effective when you do need to focus.
Like the hospital example again, the cost of running with zero slack, sacrificing rest, is just enormous in the long run.
It truly is. And the third strategy they offer is to set reminders.
Set reminders. Why is that so important in escaping scarcity?
Because, as we discussed, the burden of scarcity, the bandwidth tax, it often makes us neglect those important but non-urgent tasks. They just fall out of our tunnel vision.
Okay.
So setting reminders consciously and systematically is crucial. It pulls those vital things back into our awareness, back onto our limited mental highway.
So practical examples.
Right.
If you want to exercise regularly, don't just hope you'll feel like it. Schedule it in your calendar. Set phone alerts.
Make it concrete.
If you want to save money, don't rely on having leftover cash at the end of the month. Set up an automatic transfer from your paycheck straight into a separate savings account the day you get paid.
Exactly. You make the positive action the default.
So inaction, or neglect in this case, actually leads to progress because the system is doing it for you.
Precisely. It automatically helps steer your life in a better direction without requiring constant conscious effort or willpower, which are often depleted by scarcity.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together then. Scarcity, as Mullainathan and Shafir define it in this really insightful book, it's fundamentally a mindset. It's a psychological state.
That's the core takeaway.
And once you fall into that mindset, you can get caught in this really damaging trap. It leads to tunnel vision, where you only focus on the urgent stuff and ignore the truly important long-term things. It creates a lack of slack, making your work, your life, feel rigid, stressful, and fragile. It encourages borrowing, constantly taking from the future to survive the present.
Right.
And maybe most critically, it depletes your mental bandwidth, making you more likely to make poor decisions and less able to plan your way out. It becomes a vicious cycle.
It really does. But the good news is there are clear, actionable ways to fight back and break free. First, actively work to save your bandwidth. Reduce those trivial daily decisions. Simplify where you can. Second, intentionally create slack in your life. Build buffers, that seemingly wasted time or money. It's actually vital for efficiency, resilience, and well-being. And third, use reminders strategically. Set systems in place to make sure the important but not urgent tasks don't get permanently crowded out by the tyranny of the immediate.
Ultimately, it seems scarcity isn't just about the external circumstances, is it? It's profoundly about our internal state, our mindset, and how that affects our cognitive capacity.
Possibly.
The fundamental difference between people who seem to thrive versus those who stay stuck often comes down to how they manage their resources, yes, but also how they perceive their situation and their own capabilities within that scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
And the encouraging part is that even a small shift in that mindset, maybe a slight adjustment to your daily rhythm to create a bit more slack or save a bit more bandwidth, that can potentially set off a positive domino effect. It can start turning that vicious cycle into a virtuous one.
You know, resources themselves, money, time, they might seem scarce sometimes,
Like
but
so.
perhaps they aren't what's truly scarce in the world. What seems truly dangerous, the thing that really holds us back according to this research, is the scarcity mindset itself.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? And maybe it raises a question for everyone listening. What's one area in your own life right now where you feel that pinch, that sense of scarcity? Maybe it's time, maybe it's focus, maybe patience, or even energy. And thinking about what we've discussed, what's one small concrete step you could take starting today to try and shift that mindset just a little, to create just a tiny bit more slack for yourself?